All right, hello and welcome to the Minnesota Gardening Podcast. It is my honor to have you here with us today and have another great guest with us. We have Stephanie Rose, and she has a wonderful book called Regenerative Garden. So it's 80 practical projects for creating a self-sustaining garden ecosystem. It's just a lovely book that I really enjoyed reading and checking out. So Stephanie, thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much for inviting me to the podcast.
Thank you so much for being generous with your time with all of our listeners. And so the Regenerative Garden has been out for a couple of years, and I just first like you to chat a little about why you read the book, and why you wrote the book, and why and what brought you into this world.
Well, so I get asked this question a lot, and it's been many years since I started gardening. But I wasn't a gardener. I didn't grow up gardening. I didn't have a grandmother or mother sort of teaching me. I grew up in the city, and one day I got back from a trip to Italy, and I got a headache, and it turned into a severe and very sudden disability that took me out for about 7 years.
Oh, wow.
In the first year, I couldn't even get out of bed. And so around the second year, as I started to sort of gain a little bit more energy and wanted to get out of bed, I started to use gardening as my self-directed rehabilitation program. So I got every book from the library on gardening and learned how to garden hands-on. This was back in 2006. I sat there for years just going through all the books and then testing it out in my little urban garden in Vancouver, BC, Canada. And over the years, so I'm going to jump ahead, about five more years after that, I had sort of recovered to a place where I was a lot healthier. I completely transformed my garden. I learned about perennials and herbs and vegetable gardening and trees and espalier and all these things. And then I thought, this is a very labor-intensive way of gardening. And I looked at nature and thought, it's so interesting that we spend so much time on our land, like our little yards or our big homesteads, and we clear everything out and plant new stuff and then spend so much time tending to it. And when you look at a forest or a meadow, Mother Nature just has these ecosystems that roll with it. So I started getting interested in permaculture. By this point, I'd been a Vancouver Master Gardener doing children's gardens for years. I'd done a charity garden. I joined community gardens. And I saw how people were doing gardening all along the way, and I was really drawn to permaculture. So now, jump forward, when I got to my next house, I started really digging into these permaculture principles and how we could apply them on the home garden, because permaculture texts are like giant books full of really detailed information.
Right?
It's so much. So I really needed to break this down for me to be simple in my urban gardens, because I now live and work with a disability. So my disability is permanent, but my activity levels are like, you can't even see it. It feels like an invisible disability to most people, because I'm really accomplished, because I found the easy and accessible way to garden. So it's not just for me, but also using the power of Mother Nature to sort of regenerate our spaces. So that's what was born, was the Regenerative Garden. It follows the path of the projects that I put into that book and the different sections of how a regenerative garden comes together.
Yeah, let's talk, Stephanie, a little bit about that learning process, because so many people are either scared of getting into gardening because they don't want to screw it up and do things I'm putting air quotes on things in the wrong way. They are really worried about that. So how did you have, I don't know if it's the confidence or the gumption or whatever it may be, to kind of take that leap into using gardening as a way to heal yourself?
You know, you're so right. And I love that you said that, because it does seem to be the thing. People say, I've got a black thumb, or I can't garden, or I don't know where to start. And there's this level of overwhelm that prevents them from doing it. I am very good at failing. I love failing because I see it as an opportunity to learn. You know, I congratulate my 11-year-old son whenever he fails, because he had the opportunity to learn something. So I took on some really crazy things and sort of jumped off the diving board and went, okay, I don't know how this is going to go. So, for example, when I started a charity garden in my front yard, I met a man named Guy. I met a guy named Guy, and he and he had all these perennial plants that he divided. He had a landscaping business, and then he took the perennial plants and sort of had a home nursery. And he hired people who lived in our downtown east side who were dealing with addiction to give them work in landscaping. skills in landscaping and nursery work. And so he had this sort of project going on. And I said, you know what? If you need a place to put your plants, I've got a sunny front yard, bring them over to me. And he brought me 300 1-gallon pots with a green leaf sticking out of it, no labels. And then he left.
Wow.
Yay! So I actually sat there with these plants and I put them in the garden and I made a ton of mistakes, but over the years I learned. And so I think the biggest advice I have is not to rush it, to spend some time experimenting. I've got another book, the one that came out before Regenerative Garden. It's called Garden Alchemy, and it talks all about this. It's about observation, experimentation, learning, documentation, sort of learning from the plants. And so I started with books, I experimented, and that's how I grew as a gardener.
And you've got a wonderful section in the book here about learning about your soils from the weeds that are growing there. And I just thought that was super clever and a really great way of looking at that. Can you explain that concept to folks?
Yes, it's such an interesting concept. We look at weeds as these sort of evildoers who are coming in and taking over our landscapes. But truly, weeds are plants that are robust and smart, and it's nature saying, hey, this soil needs something. We're not meant to have a monoculture in our personal landscapes or even anywhere. It's meant to be a number of different plants all working together in an ecosystem. So, for example, if we look at lawns, the simplest is to look at a lawn. So we're creating a monoculture by planting a bunch of grass seeds, which have shallow roots. We don't let them go to seed. We keep trimming them. They need to go dormant in the summer to protect themselves from heat, but instead we keep watering them, so we're constantly stressing them. So if we look at each one of these pieces of grass, it's under constant stress, and we are working so hard to manage it. Now, dandelions will blow their wonderful seeds and come plant themselves in the middle of our lawn, and we go, oh, the horror. However, those long tap roots of the dandelion are mining down for the deep minerals that the shallow grass seeds can't get. They're pulling it up, it goes into their leaves, and when the plants die back, the nutrients that are in the leaves compost on the top of the soil and then became bioavailable to the shallow rooted plants. So they're breaking up compacted soil, they're adding spaces for water to collect and drain, they're adding aeration, and they're adding nutrients to the soil. So they're actually working with the grasses. We start to see plants for what they do, then we can start to learn about our soils a little bit more.
And how do people, I guess I'm not asking for a shortcut here, but how do people get to know those kinds of things? Is it the power of observation skills through seasonality and things and just looking at and paying attention to what you're doing? Or what kind of options do you have for people to really be able to understand and to genuinely see those kinds of things that are going on?
You know, it's such a good question because I think there is a shortcut. When people ask me the difficult questions, I have a few answers that always come back. And it's having a flexible mindset, being open to something. You know, we have the things that are in front of our face that we've known forever. Like all the gardening books that I was reading told me one way of doing things and how we'd been doing it. All the garden centers and the master gardeners and all the community gardeners, they didn't necessarily agree, but we were kind of following this methodology. So it's looking at these orthodoxies, these things that we know to be true, and challenging them and trying to see beyond. So if we see a plant growing in our garden, whether it be some invasive weed, buttercup, bindweed, horsetail, I don't know the ones that you have there, I know the ones that we have here in Vancouver, and looking at them and saying, why are they growing? What does my soil need that it made it the perfect condition for it to grow? And what is it giving back to the soil? So, you know, then we can do our little investigation and go, okay, I've got this weed now. I'm going to look at what conditions it grows in. I'm going to look at my soil and see if it's creating the perfect environment, or maybe it's missing something that plant needs to put back in. Because when we look at ditches by the side of the road, it's not the cultivated plants that are growing, it's the ones that thrive and are regenerating the soil on their own. So they become soil fixers rather than pests.
Yeah, my pests that I have as a weed are thistles. Love my
Yes.
my great soil that I have in Shakopee, Minnesota. They absolutely love it, and so we've been dealing with those punks time and time again. The reason why I came, I was just have a client we were working through a thistle problem and how to deal with it earlier today. So with that, another thing that is really important. And I'm going to kind of put a plug in for, like, we have a community called minnesotagardening.com, and at Minnesota Gardening, we really focus on building a community of folks who really want to make the world a better place through gardening. And so that's planting helpful plants and making sure that we are reducing our lawn area and making sure that also that we are growing our own food and flowers and those kinds of things to help the world. And so it's a beautiful community, and I really loved the section of your book talking all about community gardening and building. Let's see, I'm just going to make sure I don't misquote things. So building sharing spaces for everyone. And I really loved that. Could you introduce that last section of the book and why it's important to you?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, when I was writing this book, I laid out all the chapters and I included the final chapter to be wildlife, the idea of, like, you know, we're creating gardens that invite nature into our space, supporting with wild plants, you know, how we need predatory insects and pollinators and all these things in order to keep our ecosystem in check. And as I sat and thought about it, I thought, who are the creatures that use our yards? And my mind opened up, especially because I wrote this book just after sort of 2020. I was writing it in 2021. And so after everything had shut down for COVID, we found this sort of people going out into their front yards. It became their water cooler of sorts. They weren't going into an office anymore, so they would go out in the front garden and they would water and they would weed and they would plant some things and chitty chat with their neighbors. And I thought, who uses our yards is us. We do, our families. You know, so often the gardener is in service to the garden. We want to make a beautiful garden, but we forget how much the garden gives us. So our families, our friends that we invite over, our neighbors that pass by, the people walking the dogs, the people who are out for a stroll, you don't know what's going on in their day, but having your gardens be available to them is a gift. And so then it's, you know, like the children in the neighborhood. I had this garden in my first house where I made a big circle in the front garden. It for some reason, I wanted that perennial garden to be in a big circle. And there was a pathway that went through it, and I put a bench in the middle. And I would constantly find people sitting on the bench in my front yard, like clearly my property, but they were sitting on the bench because it was so welcoming. And I would find children all in the garden picking things like blueberries and tomatoes. And so I started planting things specifically for the people who were using my garden as a public space. And I thought, this is the kind of concept that brings us together. In my neighborhood in East Vancouver, it's called the Grandview Woodland neighborhood, and everybody has a front garden. There's no real lawns. There's not fences. The fences tend to be decorative and maybe to keep pets in, but it's really landscaped in very quirky ways. And so when I wrote this chapter, I looked at how are people reaching out into the community. So there's how we do our yards, so our back space for our families and friends and entertaining, our front space to reach out into our neighborhoods, and then the public space in front of our homes where people can put seed libraries, like little book libraries, but for seeds. There's about 8 of them just in my neighborhood. There's a little Google walking map so you can get to all of them. There's like free flower stands where you can donate, get a bouquet of flowers from a urban flower farmer who's decided to put their excess out there. It takes those concepts of the, farm stand that exists sort of in country and takes it into urban areas. I've got some extra tomatoes. I'm going to put them out front and share them with my community. And that brings us together in a way that helps not only beautify the space that we live in, but connects our neighbors so that if I need a lawnmower, I can borrow one from my neighbor rather than us all having to buy our own separate lawnmowers for our tiny little lawns. Or if I need a gardening tool or I need a cup of sugar, then we share sort of the way we used to, but we don't as much anymore.
Yeah, I couldn't possibly agree more with all the awesome things you're saying. We have in our front yard, we have a free little library, and I have put seeds in there, but I don't do it continuously. So we have a library up there, and I moved my entire vegetable garden to our front yard. So just for those reasons, because we had space, and I wanted it to be part of who we are and part of the community and part of where things go. And so what are things that you find people are attracted to? Are there certain garden type installations, or what have you found across your area that work for these kinds of things? What are some ideas that you have for people to continue building community into their gardens, and why?
I think now it's flowers, and flowers just make people happy. When I moved in, so now I'm in a third house, And some of the gardens that I've created, vegetable gardens or perennial gardens, as soon as you put flowers in them, people stop and look. When I was renovating my front garden at this house, it was this lawn with a giant laurel shrub, and that's it, as every house in the neighborhood seems to have when I buy it. It's perfect because it's the blank slate for me. And I pulled out that lawn and I planted 1,500 spring bulbs in the fall. And my neighbors were all watching me, and it was all soil, and it kind of looked a mess. And then I overseeded the entire thing with a wildflower mix. So I took out the entire lawn and I put in thousands of flowers. And over the year, it got to the point where everybody in the neighborhood would stop and look at my yard. They would watch the bees. I would have to, if I had to get somewhere in a hurry, I wouldn't be able to just walk out the door if somebody was there because they want to talk about the lawn. So I would have to manage. I'd look out and I'm like, okay, somebody's there. I need an extra 10 minutes to get to my car. So, and I had neighbors come up to me and they said, I've been watching the homeowners struggle with this lawn for the last 13 years. And now it's a place where I always stray 2 blocks to walk by your house to make sure I get to see what's going on.
That's so wonderful. Yeah, that's absolutely a perfect thing to do, and making sure that folks are know and have those conversations. I think you're hitting on a really important point as well, of that it's not just the trees and the shrubs and the flowers and the vegetables and things. It's that human interaction and that ability to and want to give and connect with how gardens are able to do that, and how they have over history of man. That's been one of the places since we started agriculture and cultivating, like working together, and in the United States and in North America, how that has progressed over time, I think is a really, really important point that gardens bring us to today, unbeknownst. And I think maybe not unbeknownst, but like how we have kind of lost that a little bit, and everything has gone digital, and we've had like, you and I are benefiting from digital today, getting to know each other, but that ability to have those face-to-face and personal contacts is huge.
Yeah, it's almost a radical act to focus on our neighborhoods with such a global environment, and the fact that we can connect with everybody online, to actually turn off that screen and head outside and talk to your neighbors and just take that opportunity to get to know them. And I'll say, like, the education component, the reason why it takes me a long time when I go outside is because people want to know what the deal is with this flower garden that I have. And I planted it last year in February. I seeded it again. So I planted the bulbs in fall. I seeded it in February, March, and April. So 3 sets of seeding. And then I didn't water 1 drop the entire year.
Wow.
And I didn't mow it at all. So I've got the most beautiful lawn in the entire neighborhood, and I do 0 work. And so the whole thing sort of flopped over and died. The bulbs have all come back out already, and I'm going to throw out some seeds out there again, but it requires almost nothing because all of the plant material fell in place, composted. A lot of them went to seed and dropped their seeds, so they're already starting to come up without my input. Eventually, this is just going to be a wild space that I don't have to do anything with except just enjoy. And to say, it becomes a haven for butterflies, migrating butterflies. They have a place to stop, on their migration paths. There's bees from all over. Anybody who has bees in their home, or wild bees as they emerge, they always have something where they can nest, a place where they can feed, a place where they can lay eggs and breed. I have a couple bee houses out there as well to support the pollinators because there's just so many flowers. So I'm really excited to see how it turns out this year.
Right. That is so wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing, Stephanie. We're bumping up against the end time that we've got here for today. What have I not asked, whether it's with the book or whether with the work that you do? I'll ask you to give some connecting things in just a second. But is there anything that you'd like to talk about today that we haven't really covered that you think is important for folks to know in this realm?
I think I really liked your question about the fact that anybody can do it. So I started all of this writing that I've done. I've written 12 books now, and I'm just signed the contract last week to write the next one. And so you can follow me on garden therapy. I started writing about my journey of healing through gardening on garden therapy, and I have thousands of ideas and accessible projects for people who live with disabilities or don't have disabilities. It's for everyone, whether you're having a bad hair day or you're healing from grief or you've got back pain. There's lots of ways that you can get involved in the garden. So my ideas there are meant to try to connect people with the garden so they can fall in love with it the same way I did.
Got it. That is perfect. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie. So, where do people find you at Garden Therapy? Is it just wherever folks are? Or what's the best way?
Yeah, gardentherapy.ca is my website. CA because we're in Canada. If you Google anything like Stephanie Garden Therapy, Stephanie Garden Author, anything like that, I should generally come up. But on all social media, I'm Garden Therapy. So in your Instagram search bar, TikTok, or anything like that, you can put Garden Therapy in, and Stephanie Rose should show up. So hope to see you wherever it makes sense.
Perfect. And I will put all the links at minnesotagardening.com as well as in the show notes for this episode here, wherever you are listening to it. So those will all be there. Well, Stephanie, thank you so much. This has just been a wonderful, wonderful conversation. I appreciate your time and your enthusiasm and your passion for this and helping people. So thank you so much for sharing with us all today.
Thank you so much, Brad. It's just been an absolute pleasure.
Have a great day. Thank you.
You too. Bye.